All right, let's get started with the Unit 3 test review. Chapter 7, the Nietzsche chapter. Now, in the parable of the madman and the death of God, as I explain in the commentary of the text, and as you probably have figured out on your own after reading the actual primary source text written by Nietzsche, the meaning of the parable is it has to do with the awareness on the part of a solitary individual, the madman, who's really not a madman. He's perceived to be a madman. He is the first to discover, to become aware of the so-called death of God. The awareness that Westerners no longer revere God the way they used to in prior ages. That God no longer has a hold on the collective consciousness of the European, of the modern European, right? And literally the story is about a madman entering a marketplace right at dawn, asking the public, right, the people shopping in the marketplace and selling their wares, asking, "Where is God? Where is God?" And then he answers the question for them. He says, "God is dead because we have killed him." Right? Now, what's so awful about the death of God? Why is the madman being so dramatic? Why is he making such a huge outcry about the disappearance of God from our lives, from our cultural horizon? Well, the problem is that the problem of nihilism, right? The death of God ushers in the problem of nihilism. He says that once God has been wiped away from the horizon, we no longer really know our place in the world. There's no center, right? There is no up or down. There are no coordinates. There are no standards, moral standards to which we can appeal when we are trying to find the correct way to live our lives and so forth. So we're left in a void, in a complete void, which is basically nihilism. Nihilism is the view that there is no longer any ultimate, absolute, universal, or objective standard of right and wrong or good and bad, that life is ultimately meaningless. And for the madman in the parable, that's essentially the consequence of atheism, is that we are confronted with the meaninglessness of life. There's a wonderful line from Macbeth, which very nicely kind of expresses this view, this terrible reality that the madman is the first to see as a consequence of atheism, right? Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Right? That is a very poetic expression of the utter meaninglessness and futility of human life. And that is the consequence, again, that is the consequence of atheism. Now, in the section, What is Noble, in chapter 7, Nietzsche makes his very interesting comment about the nature of life itself. All living things, he says, are or express the will to power. The will to power is this vital energy, this life force that permeates all things, right? And all living things are characterized, he says, by this tendency to want to ascend, to grow, to exploit their environment, to expand, to cause injury, right? To devour their surroundings, right? Life itself is imperialistic. It's dynamic. It's greedy. It wants to assimilate its environment to itself, right? And he says not only do human beings have this characteristic, the will to power. But even microorganisms have it. Even cultures, whole societies express this vital force known as the will to power. For Nietzsche, that is the ultimate reality that grounds everything, is this tendency for living things to want to dominate and to expand. Now, Nietzsche, as you should know by now, is not an egalitarian. He doesn't believe in natural equality, right? He believes that humanity is hierarchical, that different types of individuals have different degrees of worth and value, which is a very offensive notion to those of us who subscribe to liberal, democratic, egalitarian values. But Nietzsche is very much an enemy of those types of values. So for Nietzsche, the best kind of society is an aristocratic society or a hierarchical society, right? And these kinds of societies emerge not through peaceful means, but typically through imperialistic means, right? And they exhibit what Nietzsche calls master morality, where there's a distinction between the good, who are the strong, the noble, the assertive, the arrogant, the proud, the resilient few who govern over the many, and in fact oppress and exploit the many, the what he calls the bad people, who do not possess any of the good qualities that define the noble types, right? So this kind of society is the opposite of an egalitarian society, right? And an aristocratic society, in Nietzsche's view, it represents the pinnacle of the will to power, the will to power at its strongest, at its most vital and intense. And this is the kind of society, in Nietzsche's view, that produces great works of art, great political achievements. These are the societies that produce greatness, the greatest specimens of the human race. And this is what he wants to see more of. All right, so if you look in the text in the commentary, I have a very, very clear exposition of the relationship between master morality and slave morality. So I would look at that very carefully. Basically, with master morality, you have good and bad. Those are the two value terms in master morality. Good represents those noble qualities that I just mentioned, and bad is the absence of those noble qualities. So the bad man is the slavish, the meek, the resentful, petty man, whereas the noble man is the courageous, strong, fearless, proud, stern, diligent, superior type, right? They're basically opposites, right? Now, in slave morality, on the other hand, you have an inversion of the value terms from master morality. So in slave morality, the two value terms, as I explained in the commentary, are good and evil. Now, I have a little kind of sort of like a diagram where I show how the value terms change from master morality to slave morality. So they're basically inverted. So the good of master morality becomes the evil of slave morality, and the bad of master morality becomes the good of slave morality. All right? Okay, so for Nietzsche, who is, again, he thinks that human beings occupy a hierarchical structure, that human beings are not equal. They are not equal. That some human beings are superior to others. That's essentially his view. You have the good men of master morality, and then the bad men of master morality. Excuse me. right? They are not equals. They are not equals. So the modern liberal democratic ideal, which has prevailed in the Western world for the last roughly 2 centuries, is the epitome, one might say. Well, this is debatable, but he finds many characteristics in liberal egalitarianism that he sees as slavish. First and foremost among which would be the view that human beings are equal or ought to be treated equally. Right? He is clearly in disagreement with that position. So there's something slavish about the modern liberal democratic ideal. So nihilism, we've already kind of covered that. Nihilism, essentially the view that there are no objective or universal standards of good and bad or right or wrong, that the world and human life itself are utterly meaningless. Right? So a nihilist is literally someone who believes in nothing. And for Nietzsche, nihilism is the fact of life. If you acknowledge that God does not exist, then nihilism is the inescapable consequence of that awareness. Because without God, there is no transcendent realm of values, or there's no ultimate cosmic meaning, right? Because there's no cosmic being to give the universe meaning, right? So you might remember from St. Thomas Aquinas, right? He of course is a Christian, and if you look at his treatise on law, which we covered in an earlier chapter, he talks about eternal law, which is God's providential plan for the universe and for everything in it, especially human beings, right? So that the universe has a meaning and it has a goal that God puts into place. The human species has a specific nature and purpose that God instills in us. But in the absence of God, right, there are no such purposes. There is no such meaning in life. And therefore we are left in this condition of nihilism, where where nothing is true and everything is permitted. Right? And Nietzsche is aware of the dangers of nihilism. It's something that has to be overcome. And how is it overcome? Through creating a morality, through creating a system of values. For Nietzsche, all values, all moral beliefs or opinions are man-made. And there are two fundamental types of moralities, which we've covered already. Master morality, which is a reflection of the greater vitality and strength and nobility of the human species, right? And then there's slave morality, which is a reflection of the diminished vitality, of the weakness, of the world weariness of the slavish types of human beings. But in either case, these moralities are entirely man-made. So when we find value in the world, it is really us. It is us that we are the ones who create that value, right? That meaning. It's all man-made. It's all artificial, right? Because again, Nietzsche is a nihilist, and therefore he acknowledges that the universe is utterly without purpose or meaning, right? Now, in the master morality, right, the noble type of man, the good man, as he calls him, feels contempt and scorn for the bad man, for the cowardly, the meek, and resentful man, right? In slave morality, right, the good man of slave morality, which is the bad man of master morality, right? The good man of slave morality feels resentment and envy towards the evil man of slave morality, right? So let me just clarify that. So in the noble type of human being feels scorn and contempt for his inferior, for those low types of and slavish types of human beings. Whereas the cowardly and meek and slavish human being feels resentment and envy towards the noble and good type of human being. So resentment and contempt are two very different emotions. They're similar in certain ways. They're both negative emotions. They're a kind of negative emotion expressed towards another person. but they're different in the sense that whereas contempt or scorn looks down on the object of one's contempt, resentment looks up at the object of one's resentment. It's an awareness that you hate something that you recognize as better than yourself, and you hate that superior person precisely because he or she has something that you don't have, but secretly want. Right? So resentment is, according to Nietzsche, a very slavish emotion, whereas scorn or contempt are appropriate reactions of a superior individual towards an inferior individual. Okay, so slave morality for Nietzsche is a reaction against master morality. And he says, he's very explicit. He says slave morality is essentially a morality of utility. And he clarifies that by saying that the slaves, right, they find life intolerable when they live under a master morality, right? These weak, slavish types of human beings cannot flourish, or that's the wrong way of putting it. They cannot endure life if they are the object of scorn and contempt, right? If they are the object of disgust by those superior noble types that hold themselves to very high standards, right? A slavish type of human being, he says, can really only endure life, and can only endure the burden of living if they live in a slave morality, which elevates to the status of good all of those qualities which he says alleviate the suffering of the slaves. What kind of qualities? Well, he says the kind, helping heart, right? The patient, humble man, right? Or to put it in contemporary language, tolerance, mutual respect, belief in fundamental equality, that sort of thing. So slave morality, it's born out of the desire of the slaves to be able to live tolerably, to be able to live in a way that that is more or less comfortable, right? And slave morality makes that possible. Okay, so master morality, on the other hand, comes from the just spontaneous assertion of the nobleman's greatness, right? The nobleman, he says, is aware of his greatness and asserts that all of his qualities are the embodiment of good, and the absence of those qualities are the embodiment of bad or vulgar or low, right? So yes, so slave morality originates out of the need to alleviate the burden and the suffering of existence, to make life tolerable for the slaves. And master morality is simply the nobleman's self-glorification. Moving now to chapter 8, Jose Ortega y Gasset. And the chapter is taken from his book called The Revolt of the Masses. And you can see there are certain overtones in Ortega that are clearly coming from Nietzsche. Right? Nietzsche is an influence, or at least his type of thinking is an influence on Ortega. Nietzsche and Ortega are both enemies of egalitarianism. They both see deficiencies and weaknesses in the view that all human beings are equal. So they both view humanity as occupying a hierarchy, right, where you have the high and the low, as opposed to seeing humanity as fundamentally equal, right? Now, in the old, okay, let me just begin by saying that for Ortega, humanity is divided up into two fundamental types. There are the select minorities, or the select minority, I think he uses the singular, and the mass man. Now, the mass man, he says, is basically the average man. The average man who's comfortable with his averageness, who does not aspire to be anything greater than average. The mass man does not hold himself to any high standard. The mass man does not have any burning ambition or desire to be great or even to become better than he already is. Right? The select minority, on the other hand, he says, is made up of those individuals who hold themselves to very high standards, sometimes even impossibly high standards. Okay? So in the old days, Ortega argues, in the old days, for most of human civilization, the three most important areas of influence in a culture, in a society, politics or government, education, and the arts. Those three areas were exclusively occupied by the select minority, right? By those who were especially qualified, who were competent, and who held themselves to high standards. They were the only ones who were in charge of government, the cultural life, the artistic life of a society, and the educational establishment. But what's happened in late modernity, in the time that Ortega is writing in the 20th century, what has happened is that the masses have begun to usurp or take over those three areas of influence, and they have basically vulgarized, or they've coarsened or brought down the political, educational, and cultural or artistic life of the West. They've made it vulgar, and that's Ortega calls this hyper democracy. This is a crisis that needs to be confronted. Okay, excuse that. Okay, this is the correct slide here. So the mass man, as we pointed out, is the average man. He's mediocre. He doesn't aspire to be anything greater than mediocre. The mass man, just like the select individual, do not necessarily belong to a specific socioeconomic class. Ortega's very clear about this, right? Whether you're a mass man or a select minority does not have much to do with how much money you have, what kind of neighborhood you were raised in, your socioeconomic status. Ultimately, for Ortega, what makes you a member of the masses or the select minority is a kind of psychological state, or a state of mind, or an attitude, right? Some people that are born in very poor circumstances are members of the select minority because they have great ambition, they hold themselves to very high standards, and they want to be the best they can be, even though they come from poor circumstances. At the same time, there are some people who are born in very wealthy and comfortable circumstances, but who have all of the slavish and low attitudes of the mass man, and who are average in every way and do not set high standards for their conduct or for their future. They don't aspire to be great, right? So whether or not you're a mass man or a select individual is not affected significantly by your socioeconomic status. That's very important, right? And again, with respect to the select individual, right, this is the one who seeks to become better, who seeks to do something great, who has ambition, right? He's not he's not the snob who just thinks he's better than everyone else. That's not what makes you a select individual, right? What makes you a select individual is not an elitist snobbery towards other people, but rather the desire to become better than you are, the desire to do great things, right? Holding yourself to even impossibly high standards. Okay. All right, so hyperdemocracy is this extreme condition that we find ourselves in, according to Ortega, whereby the mass man has insinuated himself into the highest positions in civilization, right? They've taken over. They've taken over, again, government, education, and the arts. And their attitudes, their mediocrity has become the norm and even the standard that defines the entire society. So it's a very extreme form of democracy where the mass mentality is the only accepted or tolerated mentality. Again, and for Ortega, this is a crisis. All right. Let's turn quickly to chapter 9. This is the Sartre chapter. So let's contrast the traditional understanding with Sartre's radical new understanding. So in the traditional view, essence preceded existence. Essence came first. And he's referring to the Judeo-Christian notion of a universe that is conceived by and created by a creator God, by God the Father, the God of the Christian tradition. So under the traditional view that Sartre rejects, essence came first and existence came second. And what that means is God conceived the idea of mankind in his mind and then proceeded to create the species mankind, Homo sapiens, according to that idea or that plan or that essence. So that the idea of mankind comes first in the mind of God, and only afterwards does God create physically the human species, right? So the human species then, on that view, has a nature and a definition and an essence, right? And you're basically limited to your freedom is constrained by your essence. To live well, as St. Thomas Aquinas explains in his natural law theory, to live well is to live in accordance with your God-given nature, with those 4 basic inclinations that define you as a human being, right? Now, Sartre, on the other hand, rejects that traditional view and instead posits existence precedes essence, right? What he means by that is that, he's an atheist. So his entire philosophy is grounded in atheism and all the implications of the atheist position. So God does not exist. There is no creator, and therefore there is no act of creation, right? So the human species, Sartre says, just simply turns up. It exists. If you ask why are we here, he would say, who knows? But we were not created, and we exist. Maybe Darwinian evolution is the correct account, and the species, where we have a common ancestor, which and then the first living being emerged out of non-living matter in some strange, spontaneous way, right? But there's no design, there's no creation. We just simply exist. So existence comes first, and only afterwards do we acquire an essence. And by that he means our essence is basically the sum total of our actions and choices in life. All right, that's his big contribution to this discussion. That instead of God giving you an essence, you give yourself an essence. Okay? And your essence, again, to repeat, consists of your actions throughout the course of your life. Okay? All right. Now, let's quickly go over the 3 emotions that Sartre talks about: anguish, forlornness, and despair. He says that everyone who is an existentialist, everyone who in his view correctly recognizes that God does not exist, and therefore we do not have an essence, a God-given essence, and therefore that we must use our free will in order to acquire an essence, to create our own essence through our actions, will experience this sense of anguish, it's a very strange argument, to be honest. But according to his argument, if you just read the section on anguish in the reading, he says that when you choose, when you make a decision to act in one way or another, you are basically implicating all of mankind in your decision. You're choosing, he says, for all mankind. So if you are in a particular set of circumstances in which you decide to get married instead of joining the Marines and going off to a deployment overseas to fight in a war, you're choosing for all mankind. You're implicitly saying that everyone, if they were in your particular shoes, if they were in your same circumstances, would or should choose the same way you do. That's what he's arguing. And that because you're choosing for all mankind, you are subjecting yourself to this great anxiety because you are worried. You are worried that you may be making the wrong choice, that maybe you're mistaken about what's really in your best interest. And if you choose incorrectly, that means you implicate all of mankind in your bad choice. And therefore, you feel a sense of responsibility and guilt for all of mankind. That's basically the source of anguish, according to Sartre. It's a little out there. It's a little strange, I know, but that's what he argues. But let's turn now to forlornness. And this corresponds to question 3. Forlornness, right, is a feeling of abandonment, he says, that we experience once we realize that God does not exist. Right. So for Sartre, atheism is a very distressing, very terrifying, frightening state of affairs. Because if God does not exist, that means that there is no universal or objective basis for morality, right? Which means we have no external source of guidance for our lives. We cannot turn to the Ten Commandments or to the New Testament in order to find meaning and value for our lives, in order to find some kind of ethical standard that we can cling to, right? We are utterly alone in the universe, right? We have no universal or objective values to turn to, right, in order to guide and assess our lives. We have to figure it out on our own. And there's something really, really distressing and scary about that state of affairs. Okay, so we have already covered anguish. So for Sartre, as I pointed out, your essence, right, your life is really the ensemble of your acts, of your actions, of your choices, right? So you define yourself according to what you actually accomplish, what you actually do in life, not what you dream about doing, not what you wish you would do, not what you hope you will do, no, but what you actually accomplish, what you actually do in life, right? That is identical with your essence. So you create like an artist. You create your own essence. Your life is a work of art, and you are the artist. That's Sartre's position. That's how you give yourself an essence, through your actions, okay? Okay, so forlornness, we just covered that on the previous slide. Again, that is the terrible sense of abandonment that we experience when we realize that God does not exist, and therefore there is no basis for morality or justice or the good, and we're kind of lost. It's a terrible prospect, the idea of God abandoning us, not existing, because we no longer have any universal transcendent values or meaning, right, in life. We simply have to figure it out on our own and just simply choose our own path in life and create our own values. And that scares a lot of people because it's an enormous responsibility. It's easier just to turn to the Bible and say, the Bible is my instruction manual for living well, and I just need to do what the Bible tells me to do, or what it could be inferred reasonably to counsel me to do when I'm in this crisis or that moral dilemma. And there you have it, right? But in the absence of the existence of God, we are utterly abandoned and alone. And we have to find a way to figure out how to live our lives. And again, that's very distressing for Sartre. Okay. Okay. All right. So on the issue of forlornness, right? Number 7, Sartre is just continuing with this theme. He criticizes any attempt to create a secular or non-religious or worldly ethics. Right? He thinks it's disingenuous. It is hypocritical to want to abandon the belief in God on the one hand, but maintain or keep a universal or objective ethical standard on the other. So he basically says that without God, there is no intrinsic or self-evident standard of good and evil. Right? When you get God out of the picture, then there are no longer any such things as good and evil with a capital G or E. Right? There are no transcendent values. There's no objective basis for morality once you get rid of God. And a lot of atheists fail to understand that. Right? They fail to understand that they want to get rid of God, but they want to hold on to the moral tradition or the moral standards that were once seen as part and parcel of Judeo-Christianity. And Sartre is saying you cannot have it both ways. You get rid of God, you also get rid of the standard of morality that used to come from God, right? And so atheists, if they're going to be honest with themselves, they have to confront that fact that he says we are now on a plane where there are only men. There are only man-made values. There are no transcendent, self-evident moral values without God. Okay. Okay, on despair, that's the third of the 3 emotions that Sartre says are in keeping with the atheist existentialist ethos. And he says despair is this kind of feeling of dread we experience when we come to recognize that we can only choose those things which are in the realm of possibility, that our freedom is limited to that area over which we have some control. So he says we have to reckon with the ensemble of probabilities when we are about to embark on a choice, on an action. We have to have reasonable expectations and limit our actions or our choices to those things over which we actually have some control, or where there's some probability or possibility that we will succeed in what we aim to do. And so that awareness that there are limits to what we can do in life, because there are all sorts of external factors that confine your freedom. That creates a kind of a sad or despairing feeling, right? So, in other words, I may want to be an NFL player, a professional or a professional basketball player or a professional baseball player, but because I lack any athletic ability, right? None of that is really in the realm of possibility for me, right? So if I'm thinking clearly, if I have reasonable expectations, I will not try to join the National Football League, right? Because that's not within the realm of possibility. And that awareness, once I see that my freedom of choice is somewhat limited because of external factors that are outside of my control, that makes me feel this kind of sense of despair and even sadness. But Sartre's saying that's just the way it is, right? So he famously quotes Descartes, the French philosopher Descartes, when he says, conquer yourself rather than the world. In other words, have reasonable expectations, right? Use your freedom wisely, right? Only go after those things that are within the realm of possibility, and don't stress out or worry about everything else, okay? All right. So Sartre says that when you are confronted with a dilemma, right, and you have to choose between going to medical school or going to law school, right, The only way to choose, he says, is by going with your gut or your instinct or your feeling, right? And he says that there's no other basis for choice. There's no other criterion for choosing one thing over another, according to Sartre. You just go with your feeling. And then and the value of your feeling, he says, is determined by the fact that you went with it, the fact that you acted on the basis of that feeling. That's how you determine whether the feeling is genuine or not, right? That if you choose to act in accordance with that feeling, then that is a validation of your feeling. Okay. Okay. Lastly, Sartre very famously argues that we are condemned to be free. What he means by that, I think, is that with freedom comes responsibility and an awareness that we are without any external source of guidance, right? God does not exist, according to Sartre. Therefore, we have no moral tradition or any moral standard that is outside of ourselves to which we can look for guidance. So we have to just choose on our own. And the awareness of our total responsibility for what we are and for what we do is kind of a downer, right? That's why he says we're condemned to be free. He also says that our essence, the essence that we give ourselves, is basically the ensemble of our acts, right? The totality of what we do or accomplish in our lives, right? If you look at his discussion of anguish, he's basically saying that when we act, we act as if, or we choose as if we are choosing for all mankind, and that creates a sense of anguish, right? The sense of kind of dread that, we have this feeling of total responsibility for everyone. Again, it's a very strange argument. But anyway, so that's pretty much it for the essay questions. I don't want to make this too easy, so I'm going to let you work on these by yourselves. For master and slave morality, I go into this at great depth, and I think in very with some clarity and precision. You can just read up on that. Master and slave morality, they're basically inversions of the other, right? So the good of master morality equals the evil of slave morality, and the bad of master morality equals the good of slave morality. And I discuss which one comes first in the reading and how one changes into the other. Now, the question of which of the two Nietzsche would claim the U.S. Falls into, that is somewhat subjective. I think Nietzsche there's a very powerful argument one could make that we would fall into a slave morality, but there in discussion boards, I've seen very compelling and convincing arguments to the contrary. So there's no really right or wrong answer, but there is such a thing as a well-defended and well-supported answer on the one hand, and a poorly defended and poorly supported answer on the other. The former will get full points. The latter will not get full points. And lastly, what does Ortega mean by the rebellion of the masses? That should be abundantly clear. I don't think I need to comment on that further. Explain the full significance of Sartre's claim that existentialism is nothing else than an attempt to draw all the consequences of a coherent atheistic position, right? With the absence of God, we no longer have an act of creation. There is no created species, human species. Therefore, there is no human nature, because there's no God to think of the nature and to give it to us, right? So we end up indeterminate blank slates. We show up in the world without any reason why. There's no reason why we're here. We simply exist as a species, and we have no determinate God-given nature. So we are, like I said, like a blank slate or a blank canvas, and it is through our freely chosen actions throughout the course of our lives that we give ourselves an essence. That's the argument. Now, do you find that successful? Do you think that's convincing? Does he succeed in convincing you that that's really the way things are, or not? And most importantly, I need you to explain to me why or why not you think the way you do. So you have to back up and defend and support your position if you want to get full points. All right, well, that concludes our review. I wish you luck on the test. Thank you very much.